The shoulder roll. The shoulder roll defense, perfected by Floyd Mayweather, uses the lead shoulder as a shield while creating angles for counterpunching opportunities. This defensive style involves keeping the lead shoulder high and rolled forward, using it to deflect incoming punches while the rear hand stays ready to counterattack. The technique requires precise timing and positioning, as the defender must roll the shoulder at the exact moment of impact to redirect the opponent's punch. Mayweather's implementation of this style was particularly effective because he combined it with exceptional footwork and distance management, making it nearly impossible for opponents to land clean shots. Shoulder roll works best against straight punches and jabs, as the rolled shoulder naturally deflects these attacks away from the head and body. The defensive positioning also creates immediate counterpunching opportunities, as the rear hand remains loaded and ready to fire while the opponent is off balance from their deflected attack. This style requires extensive training to master the timing and positioning, as poor execution can leave the defender vulnerable to hooks and uppercuts that come around the shoulder. The shoulder roll is most effective for fighters with good reflexes and timing, as it relies on precise movement rather than simply absorbing or avoiding punches. The style's effectiveness is enhanced when combined with other defensive elements like head movement and footwork, creating a complete defensive system rather than relying on a single technique. Modern fighters who attempt to use the shoulder roll often struggle because they focus only on the shoulder movement without developing the footwork and timing that make the style truly effective. By the way, if you're enjoying these crazy martial arts stories, hit that subscribe button. I've got way more insane content like this coming. Thank you. The Peekaboo. The Peekaboo defense, made famous by Mike Tyson, uses a high guard with constant head movement to create openings for explosive counterattacks. This defensive system involves holding both gloves high near the face while keeping the elbows tight to the body, creating a protective shell around the head and torso. The style emphasizes continuous head movement, bobbing, weaving, and slipping, while maintaining the high guard position to deflect any punches that can't be avoided. Tyson's version of Peekaboo was particularly devastating because he combined the defensive positioning with explosive forward movement, allowing him to slip punches while closing distance. The high guard protects against most incoming punches, while the constant head movement makes it difficult for opponents to target specific areas or time their attacks effectively. The defensive positioning naturally sets up powerful uppercuts and hooks, as the tight guard keeps the hands in perfect position to launch devastating counterattacks. This style works best for shorter fighters who can use their low center of gravity to generate power while moving under taller opponents' punches. The Peekaboo system requires exceptional conditioning, as the constant movement and high-intensity defense work can be physically exhausting over multiple rounds. The style's effectiveness depends heavily on proper distance management, as fighters must be close enough to counterattack, but not so close that they can't use head movement effectively. Cus-D'Amato developed this system specifically for Tyson's physical attributes and fighting style, making it less effective for fighters with different body types or approaches. Modern applications of Peekaboo often fail because fighters try to copy the visual elements without understanding the underlying principles of distance, timing, and explosive movement. The cross-arm guard. The cross-armed guard, popularized by Archie Moore, involves crossing both arms in front of the face and body to create a nearly impenetrable defensive barrier. This defensive position places both forearms across the front of the body, with the arms forming an X shape that blocks most incoming punches from reaching their targets. The guard provides excellent protection against straight punches, hooks, and uppercuts, as the crossed arms create multiple layers of defense that are difficult to penetrate. Moore's implementation of this style was particularly effective because he combined it with excellent timing and the ability to quickly transition from defense to offense. The cross-arm position allows defenders to absorb punches on their arms and gloves rather than their head and body, reducing the cumulative damage over the course of a fight. The defensive positioning also creates opportunities for counterpunching, as the arms can quickly uncross to throw punches while the opponent is recovering from their attack. This style works well for fighters facing opponents with superior hand speed or power, as it provides maximum protection while allowing time to read and counter their attacks. The cross-arm guard requires good conditioning in the arms and shoulders, as holding this position for extended periods can be physically demanding. The style's effectiveness can be limited against body punchers who attack from different angles, as the crossed arms primarily protect upper body and head. George Foreman also used variations of this defense effectively, particularly in his comeback years when he relied more on defensive positioning than pure athleticism. Modern fighters rarely use the pure cross-arm guard, but elements of it appear in contemporary defensive systems, particularly when fighters need maximum protection in specific situations. The high guard. The high guard represents traditional boxing defense, both hands held high to protect the head while keeping the elbows close to protect the body. This defensive position places both gloves at approximately temple level, creating a barrier that blocks most headshots, while the elbows protect the ribs and solar plexus. The high guard is considered the most fundamental defensive position in boxing, as it provides good all-around protection and is relatively easy to learn and maintain. This style works effectively for fighters of all sizes and skill levels, making it the foundation of most boxing training programs and amateur boxing systems. The defensive positioning allows for quick transitions to offense, as both hands are in position to throw punches without major adjustments to the guard. Rocky Marciano used a variation of the high guard effectively throughout his career, combining it with aggressive forward pressure and powerful punching. The high guard provides consistent protection but can limit visibility and make it difficult to see punches coming from certain angles. This defensive style works best when combined with good footwork and head movement, as the static guard position alone is not sufficient against skilled opponents. The high guard is particularly effective against opponents who throw a lot of straight punches and jabs, as these attacks are easily blocked by the raised gloves. Joe Frazier used a modified high guard that allowed him to peek over his gloves while maintaining protection, enabling him to see openings for his devastating left hook. Modern training emphasizes the high guard as the starting point for all other defensive techniques, as fighters must master this position before moving to more advanced systems. The low guard. The low guard, famously used by Muhammad Ali, involves dropping the hands below traditional defensive positions to create psychological pressure and bait opponents into specific attacks. This defensive approach deliberately leaves certain targets open to encourage opponents to avoid predictable areas, allowing the defender to use superior reflexes and movement to avoid damage. Ali's implementation of the low guard was particularly effective because he combined it with exceptional hand speed, footwork, and the ability to read his opponent's intentions. The psychological aspect of this defense is crucial, as it can frustrate opponents and cause them to abandon their game plan in favor of trying to exploit the apparent openings. The low guard requires supreme confidence in one's defensive abilities, as any mistake in timing or positioning can result in taking significant damage. This style works best for fighters with exceptional reflexes and ring IQ, as it relies on split-second reactions rather than passive protection. The defensive positioning allows for faster counterpunching, as the hands don't have to travel as far from their resting position to throw effective punches. Roy Jones Jr. also used variations of the low guard effectively, combining it with his exceptional athleticism and hand speed to dominate opponents. The low guard can be particularly effective against opponents who become predictable in their attack patterns, as it allows the defender to time their movements perfectly. This defensive style is extremely risky for most fighters, as it requires a rare combination of physical gifts and mental toughness to execute successfully. Low guard's effectiveness diminishes significantly as fighters age and lose reflexes, making it unsuitable for long-term career strategies. The Philly Shell. The Philly Shell defense extends beyond the basic shoulder roll, incorporating a complete defensive system that includes specific footwork patterns and counter-punching setups. This style positions the lead hand low while the rear hand stays high, creating an asymmetrical guard that confuses opponents and opens up different defensive options. The low hand serves multiple purposes. It can catch body shots, parry jabs, and create openings for the rear hand to counter over the top. The defensive positioning naturally creates angles for counterpunching, as the low lead hand draws opponents into attacking patterns that can be exploited. Footwork in the Philly Shell system emphasizes lateral movement and pivoting, allowing the defender to change angles while maintaining the defensive structure. The style requires exceptional timing and ring IQ, as defenders must read their opponent's attacking patterns and position themselves accordingly. Bernard Hopkins was another master of this system, using it to extend his career well into his 40s by minimizing the damage he absorbed while maximizing his counterpunching opportunities. The Philly Shell works particularly well against aggressive fighters who throw combinations, as it provides multiple options for dealing with different types of attacks. The system's effectiveness is enhanced by psychological warfare, as the unusual guard position and defensive success can frustrate opponents into making mistakes. This defensive style requires years of practice to master, as it goes against many traditional boxing fundamentals and requires developing new muscle memory and reflexes. The Philly Shell's complexity makes it unsuitable for amateur boxing or fighters who haven't developed advanced defensive skills and ring awareness. The crab defense. The crab defense, perfected by James Tunney, involves a low crouch stance with excellent upper body movement and the ability to slip punches while moving forward. This defensive system emphasizes staying low and using subtle upper body movements to avoid punches while maintaining the ability to counterattack effectively. Tunney's implementation of this style was particularly effective because he combined it with exceptional timing and the ability to make opponents miss by minimal margins. The crouch positioning makes it difficult for opponents to land clean headshots, as the defender's head is constantly moving and positioned below the normal target area. The defensive stance allows for powerful counterpunching, particularly uppercuts and short hooks that can be thrown from the low position with devastating effect. This style requires exceptional balance and core strength, as fighters must maintain the low position while moving and throwing punches punches effectively. The crab defense works particularly well against taller opponents, as it negates their reach advantage and makes it difficult for them to find proper punching angles. The defensive positioning can be physically demanding over the course of a long fight, requiring excellent conditioning and the ability to maintain form under fatigue. Tunney's mastery of this system allowed him to have success across multiple weight classes, as the defensive principles remained effective regardless of his size. The crab defense requires years of practice to develop the necessary balance, timing, and muscle memory to execute effectively under pressure. Modern fighters who attempt to use this style often struggle because they focus on the visual elements without developing the underlying defensive skills and ring awareness. The stick and move. The stick and move defense prioritizes mobility and distance management over static defensive positions, using footwork to avoid exchanges rather than blocking or slipping punches. This defensive philosophy involves using quick, accurate punches followed by immediate movement to prevent opponents from mounting sustained attacks. Sugar Ray Leonard exemplified this style, using his exceptional footwork and hand speed to hit opponents while avoiding return fire through superior positioning. The defensive approach relies on maintaining optimal distance, close enough to land effective punches but far enough away to avoid most counterattacks. This style requires exceptional conditioning, as the constant movement and quick burst of offense can be physically demanding over multiple rounds. The stick and move approach works particularly well against aggressive fighters who rely on sustained pressure, as it prevents them from establishing their preferred fighting rhythm. The defensive positioning allows fighters to control the pace and distance of the fight, dictating when and where exchanges occur. Pernell Whitaker also used this defensive style effectively, combining it with exceptional defensive skills to frustrate opponents and win decisions. The style's effectiveness depends heavily on superior athleticism, particularly foot speed and endurance, making it less suitable for fighters without these physical gifts. The stick and move defense can be less effective against patient, technical fighters who can cut off the ring and force exchanges in close quarters. This defensive approach requires excellent ring generalship and the ability to read opponents' movements and intentions to maintain proper positioning throughout the fight. The turtle shell. The turtle shell defense involves creating maximum protection by bringing both arms and gloves close to the body and head, prioritizing survival over offensive opportunities. This defensive position is typically used when fighters are hurt or facing overwhelming offensive pressure and need to minimize damage while recovering. The turtle shell involves tucking the chin, raising both shoulders, and bringing the elbows and gloves in tight to create a compact defensive structure. This defensive approach sacrifices offensive opportunities in favor of maximum protection, making it a temporary rather than primary defensive strategy. The positioning protects the most vulnerable targets, chin, temple, and solar plexus, while accepting the same body shots may land on less critical areas. Fighters like Marvin Hagler would sometimes use turtle shell positioning when facing particularly dangerous punchers, prioritizing safety over aggression. The defensive structure can be effective for weathering storms of punches, but it typically cannot be maintained for extended periods without giving up rounds. The turtle shell requires good conditioning in the arms and shoulders, as maintaining the tight defensive position under pressure is physically demanding. This defensive approach works best when combined with good footwork to avoid being trapped against the ropes or in corners where the defense becomes less effective. The turtle shell can be a valuable survival tool. Fighters who rely on it too heavily often lose rounds and fail to mount effective offensive attacks. Modern boxing training emphasizes the turtle shell in its emergency defensive position rather than a primary fighting style or long-term strategy. The counter-punching shell. The counter-punching shell combines solid defensive positioning with the patience to wait for specific opportunities to land devastating counterattacks. This defensive system involves maintaining a strong guard while studying opponents' attack patterns to identify the best moments for counterpunching. Bernard Hopkins mastered this approach, using his defensive skills to frustrate opponents into making mistakes that he could exploit with precise counterattacks. The defensive positioning prioritizes protection while keeping the hands in position to throw quick, accurate counters when opportunities present themselves. This style requires exceptional ring IQ and the ability to read opponents' intentions, as success depends on timing and precision rather than volume punching. The counter-punching shell works particularly well against aggressive fighters who throw predictable combinations, as it allows the defender to time their counters perfectly. The defensive approach can be frustrating for opponents who expect more active engagement, often causing them to take unnecessary risks to try to force action. This style requires patience and discipline. Fighters must resist the urge to engage actively and instead wait for the right moments to attack. Counter-punching shell can be less effective against patient, technical fighters who don't provide clear openings for counterattacks. Floyd Mayweather Jr. incorporated elements of this defensive approach, using his defensive skills to set up precise counter-punches that often ended exchanges. The effectiveness of this style often increases as fights progress, as opponents become more predictable and desperate to land significant shots. The stick and move. The stick and move defense prioritizes mobility and distance management over static defensive positions, using footwork to avoid exchanges exchanges rather than blocking or slipping punches. This defensive philosophy involves using quick, accurate punches followed by immediate movement to prevent opponents from mounting sustained attacks. Sugar Ray Leonard exemplified this style, using his exceptional footwork and hand speed to hit opponents while avoiding return fire through superior positioning. The defensive approach relies on maintaining optimal distance, close enough to land effective punches but far enough away to avoid most counterattacks. This style requires exceptional conditioning, as the constant movement and quick bursts of offense can be physically demanding over multiple rounds. The stick-and-move approach works particularly well against aggressive fighters who rely on sustained pressure, as it prevents them from establishing their preferred fighting rhythm. The defensive positioning allows fighters to control the pace and distance of the fight, dictating when and where exchanges occur. Pernell Whitaker also used this defensive style effectively, combining it with exceptional defensive skills to frustrate opponents and win decisions. The style's effectiveness depends heavily on superior athleticism, particularly foot speed and endurance, making it less suitable for fighters without these physical gifts. The stick-and-move defense can be less effective against patient, technical fighters who can cut off the ring and force exchanges in close quarters. This defensive approach requires excellent ring generalship and the ability to read opponents' movements and intention to maintain proper positioning throughout the fight. The aggressive defense. The aggressive defense combines forward pressure with defensive techniques, using movement toward opponents to disrupt their offense while creating counter-punching opportunities. This defensive philosophy involves using head movement and body positioning to slip punches while moving forward, making it difficult for opponents to establish their preferred distance. Joe Frazier exemplified this style, using his bobbing and weaving movement to avoid punches while closing distance for his devastating left hook. The defensive approach requires exceptional timing and courage, as fighters must move toward incoming punches rather than away from them. This style works particularly well against taller opponents with longer reach, as the forward movement negates their distance advantage. The aggressive defense can be physically demanding, as it requires constant movement and the ability to absorb some punishment while working inside. The defensive positioning naturally sets up powerful short-range punches, particularly hooks and uppercuts that can be devastating at close range. The style requires excellent conditioning and the ability to maintain aggressive movement throughout the entire fight without losing effectiveness. The aggressive defense can be risky against accurate counterpunchers who can time the forward movement and land clean shots as the defender advances. Roberto Duran also used this defensive approach effectively, combining forward pressure with excellent head movement to overwhelm opponents in close quarters. The style's effectiveness depends on the fighter's ability to read incoming punches and slip them while maintaining forward momentum and offensive positioning. Modern fighters who attempt this style often struggle because they focus on the aggression without developing the subtle defensive skills that make it effective. The aggressive defense requires years of practice to develop the timing and confidence necessary to move toward punches rather than away from them. The elusive defense. The elusive defense prioritizes making opponents miss completely through superior movement, positioning, and timing rather than blocking or absorbing punches. This defense system involves using footwork, head movement, and upper body positioning to avoid punches entirely, minimizing cumulative damage over the course of a career. Pernell Whitaker was the master of this style, using his exceptional defensive skills to make elite fighters look ordinary while rarely taking significant damage. The defensive approach requires exceptional athletic ability, particularly balance, coordination, and the ability to read opponents' movements and intentions. The style works by making opponents miss their targets completely, causing them to waste energy and become frustrated with their inability to land clean shots. The elusive defense allows fighters to counterpunch effectively, as opponents are often off balance and vulnerable after missing their attacks. This defensive philosophy can be particularly effective in longer fights, as opponents become increasingly frustrated and begin taking unnecessary risks. The style requires constant movement and positioning adjustments, making it physically demanding but less damaging than styles that involve absorbing punishment. Willie Pep also exemplified this defensive approach, using his movement and ring IQ to avoid damage while controlling the pace and distance of his fights. The elusive defense can be less effective against patient, technical fighters who can cut off the ring and force exchanges in confined spaces. This style often produces exciting fights for knowledgeable fans who appreciate defensive artistry, though casual viewers may find it less entertaining than more aggressive approaches. If you enjoyed this video, I'm going to be posting a lot more content like this. I'd greatly appreciate it if you could subscribe and hit that notification bell. Thanks for watching.